Marigold dropped the chalk when the landlord strode into her classroom with the sheriff. 20 small heads lifted from their slates, the hum of multiplication tables dying mid-chant. He never came during lessons. He preferred to collect his money when no one was watching. So if he'd brought the lawman with him, it meant something bad enough they wanted witnesses. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. Marigold Hollis forced her fingers to unclench around the chalk nub and set it carefully on the tray, as if nothing at all were wrong. Keep working on your sixes, class, she said, praying her voice didn't shake. Row 1, you'll solve the next 5 problems on your own. Row 2, help your partners if they get stuck. Eyes on your slates, not on the door? It was a foolish hope. In a town like Red Butte, excitement came rarely. The landlord and the sheriff walking into the one-room schoolhouse in the middle of the day was the sort of thing the children would remember for years. Especially 2 boys sitting near the back one, with his boots hooked on the rung of his desk chair tipped back like he owned the place. The younger hunched over his slate with the fierce concentration of a boy desperate not to make a mistake. Westin Crowell's sons. Marigold wiped her palms on her faded blue skirt and stepped between the rows of desks, placing herself squarely between the children and the men at the door. "Mr. Proctor," she greeted, dipping her head to the landlord. "Sheriff Deeks, is something the matter?" She already knew the answer. There was always something the matter when men came with that particular tightness around their mouths. Mr. Proctor tugged at his vest, eyes flicking once, dismissively, over the chalk dust on her blouse, the mended cuffs, the warm leather boots. "Miss Hollis," he said, voice oily. "We'll need a word." Her throat went dry. "School hours aren't over yet. Won't take but a minute." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Children won't mind a short break, will you?" A murmur rippled through the room. Marigold heard a chair scrape harder than necessary, a low muttered comment that sounded suspiciously like Elias Kroll. She didn't turn. If she looked at Westin Crowell's eldest, she'd see the smirk he wore like armor, and she'd be tempted to snap at him. She needed every scrap of composure for the men in front of her. "We can step onto the porch," Sheriff Deeks offered. He didn't look unkind, but he also didn't look like a man here to argue with Mr. Proctor. Marigold lifted her chin. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it here. I don't keep secrets from my pupils." That wasn't entirely true. There were plenty of things she hid from them. The thinness of her purse, the letters she wrote and never posted the way she sometimes woke at night with her heart pounding and the memory of train smoke choking her lungs. But she would not be ushered outside like a scolded child. Mr. Proctor's mouth flattened. For a heartbeat, she thought he might insist. Then his gaze drifted over the room again, taking in the Crowell boys, the children of the ranch hands, the daughters of the laundress and the blacksmith, and the woman everyone politely called a widow even, though her husband had simply ridden away one day and never come back. He seemed to reconsider. "Fine," he said. "You all listen up, then. Might as well hear the news together." Marigold's stomach swooped. News. If it were good, he wouldn't have brought the sheriff. "As of the 1st of next month," Mr. Proctor announced, "this building will no longer be under my management." A gasp went up from the children. Someone dropped a slate. It hit the floor with a sharp crack. Marigold's heart thudded against her ribs. "You're selling the schoolhouse?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice even. "Town council's made some decisions," he said. "They've agreed to lease the land to Mr. Barnes." "The saloon keeper," Marigold said before she could stop herself. A few of the older boys sniggered. They knew Barnes' place, even if they pretended not to. Mr. Proctor's smile returned, thinner. "Entrepreneur," he corrected. "He's expanding. Wants to put in a proper establishment closer to Main Street." Marigold felt the floor tilt. "And the school?" she asked. Her voice sounded far away to her own ears. Sheriff Deeks shifted his weight, eyes skimming the restless children. "Council says they'll consider appropriations for a new building in the spring," he offered. "Maybe, once funds free up. Spring, that was months away. What about now?" Marigold asked. She could hear the edge in her voice and couldn't blunt it. "Where are these children supposed to learn their letters between now and whenever the council decides to remember they exist?" Mr. Proctor sighed, as if she were a child asking an unreasonable question. "I reckon that's a matter for you and the council to sort, Miss Hollis. My part is simple. As of the first, you endure." His gaze flicked toward the narrow stairwell leading to the tiny loft where she slept. "Effects need to be out?" Heat flared behind Marigold's eyes. "That's less than 2 weeks. 13 days, he confirmed. "I sent notice." "To where?" she demanded, incredulous. "This is where I live. Not my concern." He patted his coat pocket. "Business is business." Something in Marigold snapped then, not into anger, but into a strange, cold clarity. She decrossed too many miles and burned too many bridges to have her life pulled out from under her because a saloon keeper wanted a better corner. She folded her hands in front of her, fingers laced tight so they wouldn't shake. "The council hired me for the year," she said. "I have a contract." Mr. Proctor waved a dismissive hand. "Take it up with them. I'm simply informing you that as of the 1st, this property belongs to Barnes. You stay past that date, you'll be trespassing. And the sheriff here," he inclined his head at Deeks, "will be obliged to remove you." Murmurs rose, little faces turning from the men to Marigold and back again. She saw fear in their eyes and confusion, and something that sliced straight through her, trust. They believed she could fix this. She wished she shared their faith. "Miss Hollis?" The small voice came from the back. Not Elias, with his lazy drawl, but the younger Crowell boy, Gabriel, a quiet child, all solemn brown eyes and 2 big ears, his hair always falling into his face. "Will there still be school?" he asked. "After Christmas?" The room held its breath. Marigold wanted to lie. She wanted to smile and say, of course, and somehow make it true by sheer force of will. But she'd promised herself, the day she stepped off the train in Red Butte with 1 suitcase and a folded offer letter in her hand, that she would not build her life on wishes again. "I don't know yet," she said softly, "but I'm going to fight for it." "For you." Gabriel nodded once, as if that were enough. Elias, beside him, scoffed under his breath. "Paul fix it," he muttered, loud enough that the boys near him heard. "He always does." Marigold's gaze flicked to him, and in that instant a picture formed in her mind. The wide verandas of the Crowell ranch house, the sprawling acres of pasture, the barns and bunkhouses, and the big main house that sat on the hill like a small kingdom. Wealth, security, 1,000 things she didn't have. She crushed the thought as soon as it rose. Westin Crowell's money did not belong to her, and she would not be the sort of woman who looked at a man and saw a solution to her problems instead of a person with his own wounds. "Thank you for letting us know," she said, forcing courtesy into each word. "We'll manage the remainder of the term as best we can." Her hands were steady now. "You may go." Mr. Proctor blinked, perhaps surprised she hadn't argued more. Sheriff Deeks tipped his hat to her, his gaze apologetic, and followed the landlord out into the bright glare of Main Street. The door shut behind them with a thud that sounded far too final. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Elias kicked the leg of his desk. "Well, that's it then," he proclaimed. "No more sums." A few of the boys cheered. One of the girls burst into tears. "Enough," Marigold said sharply. The authority in her voice cut through the noise like a whip crack. "No one said anything is finished. Until I say this school is closed, you will behave as if it is open. Do I make myself clear?" They straightened, a ragged chorus of "Yes, ma'am," echoing back to her. She drew a breath and lifted the chalk again. Her fingers had stopped trembling. If she only had 13 days, she would make every one of them count. The last of the children scattered toward town when the shadows had grown long and the heat in the room had finally broken. Marigold stacked slates, straightened ink bottles, and pretended her entire future wasn't held together with fraying twine and stubbornness. She swept the floor, each stroke of the broom a small act of defiance. She wiped the day's lessons from the board, lingering for a heartbeat on the looping letters she'd written for the younger ones, and erased those too. Laughter drifted in from outside. She recognized Gabriel's quiet chuckle, Elias' louder bark of sound. Another voice joined them low, roughened by dust and distance. A voice she knew as well as the sound of the church bell. Westin Crowell had come for his sons. Marigold stiffened. He didn't often appear at the schoolhouse himself. Usually it was a ranch hand, or the boys rode home in the wagon with other children from the outlying homesteads. Westin Crowell only came down from his hill when something mattered enough to drag him away from cattle prices and water rights and 100 other things that occupied a man who owned more land than God. She told herself that whatever happened at her door next was none of his concern. She would not ask him for help. She had survived too long on her own to start leaning now. Boot steps thudded on the porch. The door swung open without a knock. Westin Crowell filled the doorway the way a storm filled the sky. Broad shoulders in a worn black coat, dust on his boots, hat-brim shadowing eyes that missed nothing. A week's worth of beard darkened his jaw, as if shaving were a luxury he hadn't bothered with lately. "Afternoon, Miss Hollis," he said, tipping his hat. She set the broom aside. "Mr. Crowell, the boys have gone out back to fetch their lunch pails." "I know." His gaze swept the room, taking in the stacked slates, the tidy rows of desks, the faint scuff marks where boots had dragged. Proctor was here. It wasn't a question. Marigold folded her arms, suddenly conscious of the sweat-damp tendrils of hair sticking to her neck. News travels fast. In a town this small, it doesn't have far to go. He stepped inside, letting the door fall shut behind him. The room seemed to shrink. "Is it true? He's selling the schoolhouse out from under you?" The words "out from under you" lodged in her chest. She swallowed them down. "The building," she corrected. "The town owns the school. Town owns a pile of lumber and nails," he said flatly. "What makes it a school is you and those children." His gaze pinned her. "Where are you supposed to go in 13 days? She hated that he knew the exact number, too. "I'll find somewhere," she said. "There are rooms above the mercantile. Perhaps Mrs. Copley has a spare." "Copley raised her rent last month," Westin said. "2 factory girls from back east are stacked in there already like cordwood." "Then I'll find another." She lifted her chin. "It's not your concern." Something flickered behind his eyes, irritation maybe, or hurt pride. Not many people told Westin Crowell what was and wasn't his concern. The railroad men and bankers came to his table, hats in hand. Ranch hands scattered when he barked a command. Even the sheriff listened when he spoke. "My sons attend this school," he said. "That makes it my concern." "Your sons attend because the town hired me," she countered, "because they decided education mattered. If they've changed their minds, perhaps you should speak to them, not me." "I have," he said grimly. "Council claims there's no money to build a new schoolhouse before spring." "Then we agree," she said. "Your quarrel is with them." "My quarrel," he said, voice dropping, "is with any man who thinks my boys can go 3 months without schooling because he wants to sell whiskey closer to the depot." For a heartbeat, the room pulsed with quiet fury that wasn't hers. Marigold had to remind herself to breathe. Westin Crowell stepped closer, close enough that she could see the faint white scar near his cheekbone. The one Gabriel had told her he'd gotten breaking a wild stallion when he was 17. close enough that she could smell sweat and leather and smoke clinging to him like a second skin. "What do you need, Miss Hollis?" he asked. "To stay?" The question was a temptation, pure and simple. What do you need? She needed a roof that wasn't on borrowed time. She needed 4 walls that wouldn't be taken away because some saloon keeper fancied himself a builder. She needed a place where the letters on the contract meant something. She thought with a sudden ache, to not have to start over again. "It isn't only about me," she said, forcing her mind back to the children. "They need desks, books, a place to meet. Even if I find another room, where am I supposed to fit 20 children?" "Barn loft," Westin said instantly. She blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "I've got a loft in the north barn that's barely used. We store old tack there now and then. It's dry. Big enough for desks?" His jaw tightened. "I'll haul the lumber myself if I have to." The image hit her like a blow. A barn loft smelling of hay and horses. Children sitting at makeshift desks while cattle lowed outside. She could almost hear the shuffle of boots on wooden planks, the murmur of recited verses. School, of a sort. "That's generous," she said carefully. "But the town—" "To hell with the town," he snapped. "I'm not asking their permission to educate my boys." Her spine stiffened. "With respect, Mr. Crowell, this isn't just about your boys." "No," he said. "It's about all of them. Which is why I'm saying I'll cover the cost. Desks, books, slate, whatever you need. Money. It always came so easily to some people." Marigold bit the inside of her cheek. "You can't simply buy the school, sir." "I can if the problem is money." "The problem," she said, "is that when one man pays for everything, he decides who belongs there. I want to have a school where children are turned away because their fathers don't work your land." He went still. It was a clean hit. She saw it land. For a heartbeat, she wondered if she'd gone too far. This was a man who could crush her with a word if he chose to. Landlords listened to him. The council listened. There were people in town who would marry their daughters to him for the security alone. But he only exhaled slowly, like a bull reining itself in. "You think that's the kind of man I am?" he said quietly. She held his gaze, even though every instinct told her to look away. "I think that power makes men forget themselves," she said. "Maybe not on purpose, maybe not at first, but little by little, they begin to believe their comfort matters more than other people's survival. So I prefer not to be beholden to any one person, no matter how kind he believes himself to be." Silence stretched between them, taut as wire. Outside, she heard Gabriel's laugh again, a clop of hooves as a wagon rolled past. Life went on, indifferent to the private war being waged inside one woman's worn-out boots. At last, Westin inclined his head. "Fair enough," he said. "You don't want my money. I appreciate the offer," she said, softening a fraction. "Truly. But if I'm to stand in front of those children and teach them to think for themselves, then I have to live by the same principles." His mouth quirked, not quite a smile. "Stubborn," he said. "Committed," she corrected. "Same thing, where I'm from." Bootsteps thudded on the porch again. The door creaked open, and Gabriel peered in. Elias behind him. "Pa?" Gabriel asked. "We're ready." "Cookie said if we're late again, she'll feed our supper to the dogs. Cookie says that every day." Elias snorted, but his eyes flicked curiously between his father and the schoolteacher. Westin didn't look away from Marigold. "Get the horses hitched," he said to his sons. "I'll be out in a minute." Elias hesitated, as if he wanted to linger, then shrugged and disappeared. Gabriel gave Marigold a small, worried look before following. Westin exhaled through his nose. 13 days, he said. "You can't solve this alone, Miss Hollis." "I've been solving things alone for a long time," she replied. "Doesn't mean you should keep doing it," he said. "But I'll respect your wishes. For now." He reached into his coat. pulled out a folded envelope, and set it on the nearest desk. If you change your mind about the loft or anything else, send a note up with Elias or Gabriel. She eyed the envelope as if it were a coiled snake. What's that? A retainer, he said, for your services as their teacher. Council pays you too little. I'm making up the difference. Before she could form a protest, he tipped his hat again and turned for the door. I didn't agree, she began. Consider it payment on a debt, he said over his shoulder. For a woman who once pulled my boy out of a river he had no business riding into. She froze. Elias had told her that story himself, the day he'd shown up at school, sopping wet and furious horse-trailing mud. She'd written to the council, asking for funding for proper fencing along the creek after that. You thanked me then, she said. Not enough, he replied. And then he was gone, leaving the envelope behind like a weight on her conscience. Westin Crowell did not like feeling helpless. He'd learned young that the world respected a man who could take the reins and make decisions. When his father died and left him with a ramshackle spread and nets up to his ears, he hadn't had the luxury of wringing his hands and waiting for someone else to fix it. He'd worked. He'd fought. He'd taken every deal that didn't stink of rot, turned away the ones that did, and built something that could withstand drought and rustlers and railroad men with smooth smiles. But no amount of land or cattle had taught him how to fix the emptiness at his dinner table. His wife's place had been empty for 3 years. The boys rode on either side of him as they left the schoolhouse behind, the town shrinking in the distance, the hills rising ahead. Elias rode a little ahead, shoulders straight, jaw set in the stubborn line that reminded Weston so much of himself at 16. It hurt to look at him sometimes. Gabriel stayed closer, fingers light on the reins, eyes drifting back toward the cluster of buildings where Marigold Hollis still stood. She's mad, isn't she? Elias said finally, breaking the silence. At who? Weston asked. At you, Elias said. Women look like that when Ma used to get cross with you. Weston's grip tightened on the reins. Miss Hollis isn't your mother. Didn't say she was, Elias muttered. Just the way she looked. Like you offered her something, and she didn't know if it was a gift or a trap. Weston stared at his son, surprised. Elias pretended not to notice, eyes fixed on the trail. She's mad at Proctor and the council, Gabriel piped up. And Mr. Barnes. She's right to be, Weston said. Town's forgotten who built it. You did, Elias said, a touch of pride in his voice. Men like me did, Weston corrected. And men who sleep in bunkhouses and eat beans more nights than they don't. And women who wash other people's clothes and keep shops and teach in drafty schoolhouses. Gabriel made a face. I like the schoolhouse. I don't want to move to a barn. Weston's chest squeezed. No one said you would. You did, Gabriel said. You told Miss Hollis we could use the north barn loft. As a temporary measure, Weston said. If she wanted. She didn't, Elias said quietly. Weston grunted. She has principles. Like Ma? Gabriel asked. For a long moment, Weston didn't answer. The wind carried the smell of sage and dust. Somewhere, a hawk shrieked. The land rolled out before them, all of it his, and yet it felt, in that moment, like he owned nothing that mattered. Your Ma had stubbornness, he said finally. Miss Hollis has something else. What? Elias asked. A line she won't cross, Weston said. Even if it would make her life easier. Elias snorted. Sounds like stubbornness to me. Weston let the conversation die there. When they crested the last rise, and the ranch spread out below them, the big house with its white-painted rails, the barns, the bunkhouses, the corrals where a few hands still worked cattle, despite the gathering dusk, Gabriel's shoulders loosened. Home tugged at him the way it always did. For Elias, it seemed lately to be more chain than rope. Go help Tommy with the evening feed, Weston said as they rode into the yard. And try not to start a fight this time. I don't start them, Elias muttered. Tommy's just a mule. And you're not? Westin asked. Elias' mouth twisted, but he swung down from the saddle and led his horse toward the barn without another word. Gabriel lingered. Pa? Yeah, bud? If there's no schoolhouse, Gabriel said, eyes wide and worried, will Miss Hollis go away? The question hit harder than Westin expected. He thought of the way she'd stood in front of those children, small and straight-backed, shielding them from bad news with nothing but her body and her voice. He thought of the fire in her eyes when she told him she wouldn't to be beholden. He thought of the empty end of the table where his wife's chair sat, polished and unused. I don't know, he said honestly. I don't want her to, Gabriel whispered. Why? Gabriel fidgeted, scuffing his boot in the dirt. She makes numbers make sense, he said, and words. And she doesn't laugh when I read slow. She just waits. Like there's time. Westin's throat tightened. We'll see what we can do, he said, reaching out to ruffle Gabriel's hair. It wasn't a promise, but it was more than he'd offered anyone in a long time. By the time supper was on the table, the house smelled of stew and fresh bread, the kind of scent that used to draw his wife from whatever task she'd been doing with a pleased hum. Now it just made the emptiness louder. You're brooding, May said, setting a basket of biscuits down with more force than strictly necessary. She'd been with the family since before Westin was born, first as a hired girl, then as housekeeper, then as something in between servant and kin. I can hear it from the kitchen. Didn't say anything? Westin muttered, breaking a biscuit in half. You don't have to. May wiped her hands on her apron and plopped into the chair opposite him, eyeing the untouched plate at the head of the table. The boys are late. Feeding, Westin said. They'll be in. May studied him for a long moment. That school mess has your jaw set tighter than a rusted stirrup. Proctor's a fool, Westin said. Counsel's worse. Preaching to the choir, May said. But that's not what has you staring at your stew like it insulted your mama. Westin didn't answer. May leaned her elbows on the table. I saw you ride in, she said. Saw you talking to Miss Hollis. She's losing her roof, he said. Because some jackass wants to build a bigger bar. Language, May said automatically. Then, softer, and you offered to help. She turned me down, he said, a touch of irritation creeping into his voice. May's lips twitched. Good for her, Westin frowned. I'm trying to do what's right. I know, May said. And I know your idea of right usually involves throwing money at a problem until it submits. Most times, that works. This time, you ran into a woman with a different notion. A misplaced notion, he said. She needs a place to sleep, May. 13 days from now. She'll be out on the street if something doesn't change. You say that like she hasn't heard a clock tick down before, May said quietly. Westin looked up sharply. You forget, May went on. I was there when she arrived off that train. Hat in her hand, shoes worn near through, clutching that offer letter like it was a lifeline. A woman doesn't to come that far with that little, because life has been kind to her. He remembered. He remembered standing on the platform, watching her step down, expecting some meek little thing with nervous eyes. Instead, he'd seen a woman with a spine of steel, and a gaze that took in the town in one sweep, assessing, measuring. He hadn't been able to look away. She doesn't want charity, he said. No, May agreed. But that doesn't mean she doesn't need help. Different things. He scrubbed a hand over his face. What would you have me do? May's eyes softened. You could start by admitting that this isn't just about the school, she said. Not for you. It's my son's education, he protested. It's that, she allowed. And it's also the way Gabriel talks about her. The way Elias watches her when he thinks no one's looking. Westin felt a pang of something sharp and unfamiliar. He gives her nothing but grief. That boy tests everyone he cares about, May said. It's how he checks if they'll stay. The words landed like a stone in his chest. You're suggesting, he began. I'm suggesting, May interrupted gently, that this house has been half empty for too long. The boys need more than a teacher they see 5 days a week, and a father who comes home after they re-asleep half the time. They need someone here. You're here, Westin said. She snorted. I'm old enough to be your mother, you mule. They need someone nearer their ma's age. Someone who can sit at this table and ask Gabriel about his letters and make Elias feel less like all the weight of this place is on his shoulders already. A dangerous thought bloomed in Westin's mind, one he'd shoved aside every time it tried to sprout these last months. You're talking about a wife, he said. I'm talking about a mother for those boys, May said. Whether she shares your bed is between you and her and the Lord, but they need a woman in their daily life. He swallowed. Town's been pushing widows and debutantes at me for 2 years, and you've turned every one of them away, May said, because you don't want a wife who sees your name and your land, and not the man. He thought of Miss Hollis standing in that schoolhouse, drawing herself up to tell him no, even though she clearly needed what he was offering. She had seen his land, his money, and chosen to keep her spine straight anyway. She'd never agree, he said. You don't know that, May replied. She won't take my money for desks, he said. You think she'd take my name? May smiled, a slow, knowing curve of her mouth. She might, she said, if you offer it the right way. Not as charity, not as rescue. Her gaze sharpened. As a bargain between equals. Footsteps thundered in the hallway. The boys burst into the dining room, smelling of hay and sweat and youth. We're not late, Gabriel announced. By the skin of your teeth, May said, rising. Wash up, and don't you dare touch that biscuit, Elias Crowell, with those filthy hands. Elias rolled his eyes but obeyed, darting a curious glance at his father before disappearing toward the washroom. Think on it, May said under her breath as she moved past Westin. Because if you don't offer her something solid, someone else might offer her something worse. The thought of Miss Hollis forced to take a room above the saloon, surrounded by drunken laughter and men with hands that didn't understand the word no, made Westin's jaw clench. He'd seen too many women ground down by bad circumstances and worse men. He would not watch it happen to her. Marigold woke the next morning to the sound of church bells and hammering. For one disoriented moment, she thought the train had come back, that she was once more lying on a narrow berth, with her suitcase tucked under her legs, listening to the world rattle past. Then the thin mattress beneath her creaked, the sloped roof above her came into focus, and she remembered where she was, and how little time she had left to stay there. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, wincing as her feet hit the cold floorboards. The hammering continued, rhythmic, insistent. She crossed to the small dormer window and pushed it open. Outside, in the pale morning light, a small crowd had gathered in front of the schoolhouse. Men in work shirts and suspenders, women in aprons, a few older children. At the center of it all stood Pastor Briggs, sleeves rolled up, swinging a hammer into a plank of wood he'd propped against 2 sawhorses. Beside him, Mrs. Copley from the mercantile held a basket of nails. Mr. Alvarez from the livery wiped sweat from his brow. Even old man Tucker, who complained about everything from taxes to the color of the sky, was there, grumbling as he measured another board. She blinked. A sign leaned against the wall, half-painted. The words Red Butte School Fund dripped in uneven strokes. What on earth? She whispered. A knock sounded at her door. She nearly tripped over her own boots in her haste to answer. Yes, she called. It's Briggs, a voice answered. May I come up? She glanced down at her plain nightdress, flushed, and grabbed her shawl, wrapping it tight around her shoulders. One moment, she said, tugging the door open a crack. I'll meet you downstairs. Of course, he said, footsteps retreating. Marigold dressed quickly, braiding her hair with practiced fingers. She scrubbed her face in the small basin, pinched color into her cheeks, and forced herself to breathe. When she stepped into the main room of the schoolhouse, Pastor Briggs was already inside, hat in hand. He was a gentle-faced man in his 50s, with thinning hair and a paunch that spoke of too many church suppers and not enough manual labor. "Miss Hollis," he said warmly, "did we wake you?" "The hammering helped," she said dryly. "What are you doing out there?" His smile widened. "What we should have done the minute Proctor opened his mouth. We're raising funds." "For?" she prompted. "A new schoolhouse," he said simply. "Before spring." Her heart did an odd little flip. "But the council will come around once they see the town's already halfway there," he said. "Some of the men have pledged lumber. Mrs. Copley's organizing a donation box at the Mercantile. We'll be passing the plate at Sunday service." He cleared his throat. "I thought it best to let you know before rumors reached you first." She sank onto the nearest desk. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll stay," he said, and there was a plea in his voice that tugged at her. She swallowed. "I want to. But 13 days isn't much time. Even if you raise the money, building takes longer. We'll find ways to bridge the gap," he said. "I've already spoken to Mrs. O'Reilly about hosting the younger children in her parlor for a few weeks, and the older ones could meet in the church hall in the afternoons. It won't be ideal, but it's something," she finished. "Yes." He hesitated. "There is one more thing." Her stomach tightened. "If you've come to tell me the council has reconsidered my employment, Pastor, No, he said quickly. "Nothing like that. If anything, they'd have a mutiny on their hands if they tried. Half the mothers in town would march to their doorstep with rolling pins." A surprised laugh bubbled out of her. She covered her mouth, but the sound lingered. "It's about your living situation," he said gently. "Mrs. Copley tells me her rooms are full up, but Mrs. Ramirez mentioned she might have a spare bed in a room she already shares with her 3 daughters," Marigold said. "I couldn't impose." "You wouldn't be imposing," he protested. "I would," she said. "I know what it is to share too little space with too many people. I won't do that to them." He sighed. "I thought you might say that." "I appreciate your concern," she said. "Truly, but I'll find my way. I always do." He looked as if he wanted to argue, then thought better of it. "If you change your mind," he said, "my door is open." "I know," she replied. When he'd gone, the echoes of hammering resumed outside. Marigold moved to the window, watching as more townsfolk drifted in, coins clinking into the donation box, hands reaching for hammers and saws. She pressed her palm to the cool glass. For the first time since Mr. Proctor had walked through her door, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone in this fight as she always felt. Her gaze snagged on a figure at the edge of the crowd. Westin Crowell stood apart, hat low, arms folded. He wasn't hammering. He wasn't holding a sign. But he was there, watching, the way a man watched a river he was considering fording. As she watched, May bustled up beside him, jabbing a finger into his chest. Even from this distance, Marigold could read the scolding tilt of the older woman's head, the way Weston's shoulders shifted, guilt and stubbornness warring. May thrust a coin pouch at him. He took it, scowling, then strode toward the donation box and dropped it in. The metal clink was audible even through the glass. Marigold's mouth curved despite everything. He wouldn't buy her school outright, but he'd help build it, quietly, where no one could accuse her of favoritism for accepting. Maybe, she thought, their principles weren't as far apart as she'd feared. The next few days blurred into a frenzy of lessons and lists. Marigold squeezed every ounce of learning she could into the remaining time in the schoolhouse. She doubled arithmetic drills, added extra reading circles, stayed late to help the older students parse out tricky passages by the light of oil lamps. Between classes, she met with Pastor Briggs and Mrs. Copley, and anyone else with ideas about where to put children when the walls around them disappeared. Mornings in Mrs. O'Reilly's parlor. Afternoons in the church hall. Evening tutoring for those who had to miss lessons to help in family shops. She was exhausted, bone-tired. She had never felt more alive. At night, alone under the sloped roof, she pulled out the envelope Westin had left and stared at it. She tucked it into a drawer, telling herself she was simply keeping it safe until she could return it. It sat there, stubbornly existing. On the fourth night, she broke. "It's not charity," she muttered to herself as she slid her thumb under the flap. "It's payment." He said so. Inside was more than a week's wages. Crisp bills folded once. No note. She exhaled, something tight inside her chest loosening. She didn't go into town the next day to hand it back. Instead, she walked to Mrs. Copley's and ordered extra slates and chalk, paying in full. "Anonymous donation," she told Mrs. Copley when the woman raised an eyebrow. "From who?" Mrs. Copley asked. "From someone who cares about the children," Marigold said. "That's all that matters." The mercantile owner studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good enough for me." When word got out that the school had supplies for the temporary classes, more coins found their way into the donation box. Pride, Marigold discovered, could be flexible when it came to the needs of others. Hers and Westin Crowell's. It happened on the 11th day. Classes had moved into Mrs. O'Reilly's parlor for the littlest ones. The room smelled of lavender and stew, the furniture pushed back to make space for small chairs and a borrowed blackboard. Marigold stood near the hearth, leading the children in a spelling game, when the front door burst open without a knock. Elias Crowell stood in the doorway, breathless, hair wild, eyes wide. "Miss Hollis," he gasped. "You gotta come." Chalk dust puffed from her fingers as she turned. "Elias Crowell, what on earth?" "It's Gabe," Elias blurted. "He fell off the south fence. Tommy sent me. It's bad." The room spun. "Mrs. O'Reilly," Marigold said, already moving. "Can you manage them for a bit?" "Go," the older woman said, face pale. Marigold grabbed her shawl and followed Elias out into the street. "Where is he?" she demanded as they ran. "In the wagon," Elias panted. "Tommy's bringing him down from the ridge. Pa's up there with the herd. He don't know yet." Fear clawed at her. Gabriel, small and earnest, reading his letters slowly while she waited. Gabriel, laughing at some private joke with his brother. Gabriel, asking her if she'd still be there after Christmas. They reached the edge of town just as the wagon rattled into view, Tommy at the reins, face grim. In the back, Gabriel lay on a heap of quilts, one leg at an angle that made Marigold's stomach lurch. "Oh, Gabe," she breathed, climbing into the wagon without waiting for permission. "Miss Hollis?" His voice was thin, threaded with pain. "I'm here," she said, taking his hand. It was clammy, fingers twitching. "Did I spell cattle right yesterday?" he whispered. Her heart cracked. "Perfectly," she said. "You did perfectly." "It was my fault," Elias said from the ground, voice raw. "We was racing along the top rail. I said he was too slow." "We'll sort blame later," Tommy snapped. "Right now we gotta get him to dock." "I'll ride with him," Marigold said. Tommy hesitated, then nodded, snapping the reins. As the wagon jolted toward town, Gabriel whimpered. Marigold squeezed his hand and murmured nonsense spelling words, arithmetic tables, little stories about letters marching in lines, anything to distract him from the pain. At the doctor's, chaos reigned. Doc Harris barked orders, nurses rushed, someone fetched Pastor Briggs. Elias paced outside the closed door, hair in his hands. "He's gonna die," he muttered. "He's gonna die, and it'll be my fault." Marigold seized his shoulders. "Look at me." He resisted, and met her gaze, eyes bloodshot. "Gabriel is hurt," she said. "He is not dead. Doc Harris is the best doctor in 3 counties. You will not bury your brother before there's cause." Tears spilled over. Elias dashed them away with a furious hand. "You don't understand. I understand more than you think," she said softly. "I know what it is like to think one moment as foolishness costs someone everything." His breath hitched. "What did you?" The door slammed open before he could finish. Doc Harris stuck his head out. "Where's Crowell?" he demanded. "Up on the south ridge," Tommy said. "With the herd." "Send someone," Doc said. "He'll want to be here." Tommy nodded and bolted. Doc turned to Marigold. "You?" He jabbed a finger at her. "You're the one he's clinging to. Come hold his hand while I set this leg." Her stomach flipped. "Me? He keeps calling for you," Doc said. "Says you can make the numbers march." "Whatever in blazes that means?" Emotion clogged her throat. "Go," Elias said hoarsely. "He likes you better anyway." "That's not true," she began. "Just go," he snapped. She went. Inside, Gabriel lay on the table, face pale, lips bitten bloody. His leg was a mess of swelling and bruises. "Gabe," she whispered, taking his hand. His eyes fluttered open. "Miss Hollis," he breathed. "I'm here," she said. Doc Harris rolled up his sleeves. "This is gonna hurt," he warned. "No use lying. But we gotta do it, or you'll walk crooked the rest of your life." Gabriel swallowed. "Can—" He looked at Marigold, panicked. "Can she say the numbers?" "I can," she said, though her own knees felt weak. "Then you count," Doc said. "And maybe don't look too close while I work." She nodded and began. 1, she whispered. 2, 3. She squeezed Gabriel's hand in time with her words. 4, 5, 6. He squeezed back, nails digging into her skin. 7, 8. Gabriel screamed as Doc pulled on the broken limb, bone grinding. Marigold's vision went white around the edges, but she kept counting. 9, 10, 11. She had held children through fevers and nightmares. She had never held one through this. By the time Doc finished, her throat was raw, and Gabriel had passed out cold. "He'll live," Doc said, wiping his hands. "Langlow'll be right as rain in a few months if he doesn't do anything foolhardy." "Good luck with that," she managed, voice shaking. Doc snorted. "You did well." "He trusted you." Trust. The word sat heavy in her chest. When Westin Crowell finally burst through the door, dust and worry all over him, he found his son breathing, legs splinted, hands still curled around Marigold's. He stopped dead in the doorway. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then he crossed the room in 3 strides. "Gabe," he rasped, touching his son's hair. "He's sleeping," Doc said. "Pain'll keep him under a while." Weston's gaze lifted to Marigold. Something raw and unguarded bled through his usual control. "You are here," he said. "Elias fetched me," she replied. "Tommy brought him down." She swallowed. "He asked me to count." Weston looked at their joined hands, at the faint crescent moons of Gabriel's nails on her skin. His jaw flexed. "Thank you," he said. "You already thanked me once," she said weakly. "Still not enough," he replied. Doc cleared his throat. "He'll need someone with him the next few days," he said. "Can't be moved much. We'll bring him home," Weston said immediately. "Home's an hour by wagon," Doc countered. "Road's rutted. That leg needs rest. Best if he stays here a day or 2. "I'll stay," Marigold said before she could think. Weston's gaze snapped to her. "You've got classes. Mrs. O'Reilly can manage with the little ones," she said. "Mrs. Copley can take the older ones through their reading for a day. They've all seen worse than a substitute teacher." She looked down at Gabriel's sleeping face. "He's scared. When he wakes up, I want him to see someone he knows." Silence stretched. Then Weston nodded once. "Thank you," he said again. The words felt different this time. He moved to the corner to confer with Doc, voices low. Marigold sat, hand still in Gabriel's, trying to still the trembling inside her. She'd done what needed doing. That was all. So why did it feel like something inside her had shifted, just a little, toward a place she'd been careful not to go? Night fell. Elias dozed in a chair, head lolling, arms folded tight as if holding himself together. Doc retired to his own room for a few hours' sleep. The nurse checked on Gabriel and declared him stable. Westin stayed. He sat across from Marigold, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. The lamplight carved lines into his face she hadn't noticed before, worry lines. Grief lines, the kinds that didn't come from sun or laughter. He looks small, Westin said quietly, eyes on his son. He is small, Marigold said. Not when he's racing his brother or arguing with me about chores, Westin said, a ghost of a smile tugging at his mouth. Then he thinks he's 10 feet tall. She watched him, something warm and painful rising in her chest. You're a good father, she said. He huffed out a breath. I don't feel like one tonight. You rode down from the ridge as soon as you heard, she said. You're sitting here instead of catching up on accounts or sleep. Those boys know they're loved. That's more than many children get. He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing her from a new angle. You speak from experience? He said. She hesitated. My father loved us, she said slowly, in his way. But there were always bills, always worries. Sometimes it felt like we were just one more burden he had to carry. You were never a burden, Westin said, so fiercely she almost believed him. She smiled faintly. You didn't know me then. I know you now, he said. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. She looked down at Gabriel, at their joined hands. Miss Hollis, he said. Marigold, she corrected softly. If we're speaking of past lives and burdens, Marigold, he repeated, the name rolling off his tongue like something he'd tasted before and found unexpectedly sweet. It did something disconcerting to her insides. You can't keep doing this alone, he said. She lifted her head. Doing what? Carrying everyone else's weight, he said. These children, this town. My sons, me. I'm not. You are, he said. You stand between them and every hard truth. Soften every blow. Stretch yourself thin so they don't feel the crack. And now you're about to lose your roof because the town doesn't have the spine to stand up to a saloon keeper. His jaw clenched. That's not right. Life isn't particularly concerned with what's right, she said. Maybe not, he said. But I am. She searched his face. What are you saying, Westin? He leaned forward, forearms braced on his thighs, hands hanging loose between his knees. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked uncertain. I've been thinking, he said. Dangerous habit? She tried to joke, but her voice came out thin. May says my boys need more than a teacher they see 4 hours a day, he went on. She says they need a woman in their home, someone who can help guide them when I'm out riding fences or arguing with ranchers. Someone who won't just tell me yes because of my name. Her heart thudded. There are plenty of women in town, she said carefully. Widows, unmarried ladies. They don't know my boys, he said. They don't know me. You do, she swallowed. Westin, you need a roof, he said, voice low but steady. A place where no landlord can toss you out because he smells a better deal. You need security enough that you can fight for those children without wondering where you sleep at night. Her fingers tightened around Gabriel's. What are you proposing? She whispered, though she already knew. He drew a slow breath, as if steadying himself against a gust of wind no one else could feel. I need a mother for my sons, he said, each word deliberate. And you need shelter. His gaze locked with hers. No room left for misunderstanding. So I have a proposition for you. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. Marigold stared at him. The lamplight caught on Westin Crowell's jaw, on the tired lines around his eyes. On the way, his hand rested near his son's broken leg, as if he could shield Gabriel from pain by touch alone. "I need a mother for my sons," he repeated quietly, "and you need shelter. So I have a proposition for you." Her heart thudded once, hard. "You choose an interesting moment, Mr. Crowell," she managed. Her fingers were still laced with Gabriel's, his pulse a faint flutter against her skin. "Westin," he said, "if I'm about to make a fool of myself, you might as well call me by my name." That almost drew a laugh from her. Almost. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "If this is about finding space for the school, we've already discussed the barn." "It's not about a barn or a classroom," he cut in. His gaze didn't leave her face. "I meant what I said. I need a mother for my sons. You need a home that isn't one eviction notice away from disappearing. I'm proposing we put those needs together." Her throat went dry. "Employment?" she asked, the word sharp. "A live-in governess?" His jaw set. "No, marriage." The room seemed to tilt. The walls of Doc Harris's surgery faded until there was only the narrow bed, Gabriel's bandaged leg, and the man beside it asking her to tie her life to his. "Marriage," she repeated, trying the word on her tongue. "It wouldn't be a storybook romance," Westin said, voice steady but low. "I want to stand here and swear I can love you the way you deserve from the first day. I buried my wife 3 years ago. Grief isn't a door you just shut." His fingers flexed against his knee. "But I can offer you my name, a home, respect. I don't drink myself stupid. I won't raise a hand to you. I won't shame you in front of my boys or this town. I can promise that much." He spoke like a man listing terms on a contract. Men had been setting terms in front of Marigold all her life. "And in return?" she asked quietly. His gaze dropped to Gabriel's hand in hers. "In return," he said, "you'd be their mother, in fact, not just for the hours between the bell and dismissal. You'd help me make this house a home again. And," his mouth tightened, "you'd share my life, my table, my decisions, my bed." Heat flared in her cheeks. She looked down at Gabriel's pale face. "I am not a marais at auction," she said, fighting to keep her voice even. "I know that," he said quickly. "This isn't a bargain for breeding stock. I'm clumsy with words, Marigold, not blind. I've watched you stand up to landlords and councilmen and me. I'm not asking you to belong to me like a thing I bought. I'm asking you to stand beside me." The way he said her name slid under her ribs. She swallowed. "You could hire any number of widows to keep your house and mind your sons," she said. "Why me?" He looked at her as if the answer were obvious. "Because you're the one they look for when they're in trouble," he said simply. "Gabe called your name while Doc set his leg. Elias acts like a mule around you, because that's what he does with anyone who matters, testing whether they'll stay. You already carry them in your head when you plan your lessons." His gaze softened. "And because you tell me no when no one else does. I don't want a wife who nods at everything I say. I want a partner who'll tell me when I'm wrong and still be there when the day S work is done." It shouldn't have made her chest ache. It did. "I won't be beholden to you," she said. "Not for a roof, not for supper. If I agree, it will not be because you've boxed me into a corner. And don't agree tonight," he said. "Think. Tear the idea to shreds if you have to. If you say no, I'll still help you find a respectable room. I'll still fight the council for a school. My offer doesn't turn into a threat." That stopped her. He was opening a door, not closing all the others. Gabriel shifted, a low sound escaping him. Instinctively, both of them leaned closer, their shoulders nearly touching over the boy. Marigold stared at their joined hands around Gabriel's smaller one. "I can't give you an answer now," she whispered. "Not with your son between us and my head full of hammer blows and eviction dates. I'll answer when I can trust that it's not panic talking. Relief flickered through his eyes, mixed with something like fear. Fair enough, he said. I'd worry if you said yes too quick. A breath she hadn't realized she was holding slid out of her. Then we'll talk later, she said. We will, he agreed. He shifted his chair closer to the bed and settled in to watch Gabriel breathe. Marigold stayed where she was, fingers wrapped around the boy's hand, mind caught between pride, fear, and a small, treacherous word that wouldn't quite go away. Home. Gabriel woke at dawn. His lashes fluttered. Brown eyes blinked blearily up at her. You stayed, he whispered. Marigold smiled, feeling every kink in her spine from the hard chair. Of course I did. Someone had to make sure Doc didn't steal your good leg for spare parts. From the next room, Doc grumbled. I heard that, and Gabriel's mouth twitched. How bad does it hurt? She asked. Like I fell off a fence, he said. Good, she said. That means you remember what not to do again. The door opened. Westin stepped in, hair rumpled, worry written plain across his face. Hey, bud, he rasped. Hey, Pa, Gabriel answered, voice small. Westin rested a big hand on his son's shoulder. You scared 10 years off me, he said. Don't do that again. Gabriel's eyes filled. I'm sorry. You're breathing, Westin said roughly. That's what matters. Another shadow darkened the doorway. Elias stood there, shoulders hunched, eyes red-rimmed, as if he'd been fighting tears and losing. Come in, Elias, Marigold said softly. He stepped inside like a boy, walking into a whipping. I did this, he blurted. I dared him. I said he was too slow. He fell, and now his legs all. His voice broke. Marigold moved around the bed, putting herself between him and the worst of his guilt. Breathe, she said firmly. In, out, or Doc will set your nose next. Gabriel gave a feeble laugh. I don't hate you, he told his brother. Elias flinched. You should. I wanted to be like you, Gabriel said stubbornly. You fall off things all the time and get up. I thought I could too. Elias's face crumpled. He dropped into the chair Marigold had vacated, scrubbing at his eyes. Westin laid a hand on his eldest shoulder. We all make mistakes, he said quietly. What matters is you ran for help instead of trying to hide it. That counts. Marigold caught Elias's gaze. For once there was no smirk, no bravado, just a scared boy. We'll talk later, she said. I have a list of safer ways for you to show off than racing fences. A flicker of his usual attitude surfaced. Doubt they'll be as fun, he muttered. We'll get creative, she replied. The moment stretched, fragile and real. Westin watched her, something guarded in him easing. The town did not stop for one broken leg or one outrageous proposal. Classes squeezed into Mrs. O'Reilly's parlor and the church hall. Children adapted, as they always did. Volunteers kept hammering at the skeleton of a new schoolhouse going up on a donated plot at the edge of Main Street. Marigold split herself thin teaching in the mornings tending, Gabriel in the afternoons meeting with Pastor Briggs and Mrs. Copley in the evenings to count the clinking coins in the donation box and stretch them as far as they would go. At night, when the town finally grew quiet, Westin's offer waited in her mind like a letter unopened. May cornered her on the third night. Marigold stepped out behind Doc's office for air that didn't reek of carbolic. Stars dusted the sky. Her shoulders sagged. Figured I'd find you hiding out here, May said, appearing near the rain barrel like a ghost in an apron. You walk too quietly, Marigold muttered. May snorted. Years of sneaking up on boys who think they're too old for bedtime. They stood in companionable silence for a beat. He told me what he asked you, May said at last. He'd climbed Marigold's neck. Of course he had. He listed what he could offer, Marigold said, the words tumbling now that someone had opened the gate. A home, protection, a place at his table, respect, and what he wanted in return. My care for his sons. My help on the ranch. My body, she swallowed. He says there may never be love the way there was with his first wife. He is very honest. Honest is more than most men manage, May said. What did you hear under all of that? Marigold stared at her hands. That he respects me, she said slowly. That he trusts me with his boys. That he is tired of eating alone. That he wants to make me safe. Her voice thinned. And that he still thinks in contracts and land. May's laugh was low. He was raised on ledgers, she said. Old man Crowell held wages over our heads like a whip. When Westin took over, he came into the bunkhouse with a ledger and a face like thunder and said, "These are the wages from now on. They don't change just because I'm in a mood." We thought he was daft. Turned out, he meant we could count on something for once. The thought twisted something inside Marigold. I don't want to be beholden, she said. Bess spent years making sure no one could pull a roof away and leave me scrambling. May's voice gentled. There's a difference between being beholden and being loved, girl, she said. Even between being beholden and being partnered. You already belong to those children. This town's halfway claimed you too. With or without his ring. Marigold's throat tightened. What do you want? May pressed. Not what your pride wants. What you, in that ink-stained heart, actually want. The answer rose, terrifying and clear. I want to keep teaching all of them, she said. Not just his lads. I want a place where my trunk is more than a traveler's box. I want... She blew out a breath. I want to belong somewhere without feeling like a stray dog sleeping on someone's porch until they kick me off. May's hand brushed her arm. Then pick the life that gives you most of that, she said. If that's with him, good. If it's not, I'll help you find something else. But don't say no just because needing someone scares you. The words hit hard. Afraid of needing anyone. Marigold stared at the dark shapes of buildings against the sky, and for the first time allowed herself to imagine saying yes. 2 days later, Gabriel was strong enough to ride home in the wagon. Doc packed his leg in pillows. May packed food. Elias hovered, guilty and protective in equal measure. You don't have to come all the way, Westin told Marigold as she climbed to the seat beside him. I want to see him settled, she said simply. He flicked the reins. The road out of town unspooled before them, dusty and familiar. Gabriel dozed in the back. Elias rode alongside, occasionally leaning over the wagon rail to murmur something to his brother. For a while, they rode in silence. When I was a boy, Westin said abruptly, this ranch house seemed bigger than the world. Marigold glanced at him. It wasn't like him to start stories about himself. And now? She asked. No, it's too big by half, he said. Echoes too much when there aren't enough voices. She watched his profile, the stubborn set of his mouth. I've never lived anywhere with more than 3 rooms, she said quietly. Too many voices can be their own kind of noise. He huffed a breath that might have been a laugh. I don't want to crowd you, he said. If you say yes, her heart jolted. I haven't said yes, she reminded him. I know, he said, but I want you to know what yes would mean. He hesitated, then went on, voice roughening. Claire and I, we had papers drawn up, deeds, wills. I told my lawyer the same thing I'm telling you now. If I die first, I want half this place in her name, so no man can take it from her and the boys. She refused to sign. Said she had enough work without me making her think about dying. A soft, sad smile tugged at his mouth. I intend to revive those papers. This time, I hope my wife will sign them. Marigold stared. You'd put my name on your land? On our land, he corrected. If you're my wife, you're not a guest in my house. You're its mistress. I want the law to remember that if I'm not here to say it out loud. Trust, something inside her whispered. partnership. Fear and pride fought inside her. Underneath both, another feeling rose, steady and new. "Why did you love her?" she asked softly. "Claire." He went quiet. The horse's hooves and the creak of the wagon filled the pause. "Because she laughed like water," he said finally. "Because she could outride most of my hands and wasn't shy about proving it. Because she called me on my temper and made me better than I would have been without her. Because she looked at this land and saw home, not just beef on the hoof." His hands tightened on the reins. "I'll always love her. That won't change." Jealousy pricked, surprising her. "Then why ask someone else to stand where she did?" she asked. "Because grief isn't a house to live in forever," he said. "It's a river you learn to cross and cross again. Claire is gone. I'm still here. The boys are still here. They need more than a ghost and a father who spends more time in the saddle than at the table." And he exhaled, "I want more too. I want someone who'll share the load and the bed and the arguments. When I picture that, I see you." The simplicity of it shook her. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I won't stop teaching. Not just your sons. All of them. I never expected you to," he said. "I'll want to say in things that touch the ranch in this town," she continued. "Not just curtains and menus. Planning to run my herds from the kitchen?" he asked. "Planning not to be wallpaper," she shot back. He smiled, quick and genuine. "Good. This place needs someone who'll argue with me. And I won't." Her cheeks heated. "I won't share a bed like an obligation. If that's all you want, you can hire someone else to mother your sons and warm your blankets." His hands tightened on the reins. "I don't want an obligation," he said quietly. "I want a woman who chooses me every day, even when I'm being a mule. I don't know what love will look like for us. But I know I'd rather figure it out with you than stay alone on that hill." The wagon rolled into the ranch yard before she could answer. Gabriel was carried inside. May fussed. Elias hovered. The house that had always seemed distant to her now loomed as a question. Behind all the noise, the clock that was her eviction date ticked louder. They settled Gabriel in a downstairs room so he wouldn't have to face the stairs. Quilts were piled, pillows fluffed. Gabriel drifted in and out, leg throbbing but set straight. When May bustled out to the kitchen, Westin lingered in the doorway. "I know you said you needed time," he said, "but Proctor doesn't care about that. In 2 days, he'll be at the schoolhouse with his papers and his sheriff. I won't force your hand. If you say no, I'll still help you find a room that isn't a broom closet. I'll still stand with you in front of that council." His eyes held hers. "But I'm asking you plainly, Marigold Hollis. Will you marry me? No contracts, no lists." She thought of Mrs. Ramirez's crowded room, of the cold, narrow boarding houses she'd lived in before. She thought of children packed shoulder to shoulder in borrowed parlors, of the town that was, against her will, becoming hers. She thought of the way Westin had offered her half his land because he wanted her secure, even if he wasn't there. Fear fluttered. Pride flared. "On the conditions we spoke of," she said, voice low but steady. "Partner, not ornament. Teacher to all the children, not just the ones who share your name. No waving your money like a club. Papers that say this place is ours. Time to grow into whatever this becomes." His shoulders eased. Something brightened in his eyes. "You have my word," he said. "Then yes," she said, the word landing solid between them. "I'll marry you, Westin Crowell." He sucked in a breath. For a heartbeat he looked almost boyish, surprised, and relieved. Slowly, as if afraid of startling her, he reached up and brushed his knuckles against her cheek. "Welcome home," he said softly. Her eyes burned. Red Butte did not know how to be subtle. By the next morning, everyone knew. Pastor Briggs arrived at Doc's with his Bible and a barely hidden smile. "If you're set on this, best do it proper," he said. "Tomorrow afternoon. Any longer, and Mrs. O'Reilly will burst keeping the news in." May appeared moments later with an armful of cream fabric. "Don't argue," she ordered. "Girl ran off with a drummer before I could sew this up for her. Consider it Providence." Marigold let herself be pinned and measured. Pastor Briggs's wife twisted her hair into a simple knot and slid a sprig of dried lavender above her ear. "For calm," she said. Calm had never felt farther away. The church was full. Gabriel sat in the front pew, leg propped, grinning like a boy at a circus. Elias tugged at the collar of a too-stiff shirt, attempting scowling dignity. May sniffed noisily into a handkerchief. Westin waited at the front, hat in his hands, jaw clenched hard enough to crack walnuts. When Marigold stepped into the aisle, a murmur rippled through the crowd. She focused on one face at a time, Gabriel's shining, Elias's wary, May's fierce, until at last she met Westin's gaze. Something in his eyes went soft and stunned. She reached his side. The noise of the church dropped to a hum. "Friends," Pastor Briggs said, were gathered to witness the joining of Westin Crowell and Marigold Hollis. "They come not running from scandal, but walking toward a shared life one that will shelter 2 boys and, I suspect, half this town's children as well." A ripple of laughter eased the tightness in Marigold's chest. "Westin," the pastor said, "do you take Marigold to be your wife? To treat her not as ornament, but as partner, to listen when she speaks, to stand with her in drought, and in plenty, in sorrow and in joy, for as long as God grants you breath?" Westin did not look away from her. "I do," he said. "Marigold," Pastor Briggs turned to her, "do you take Westin to be your husband? To stand beside him when the herd is thin and when it is fat? To keep teaching the children of this town, to mother these boys as your heart leads? To remain your own person, even as you join your life to his, for as long as God grants you breath?" Her throat tightened. "I do," she said. Her voice steadied on the words. "Any vows of your own?" the pastor asked. Westin cleared his throat. "I'm no good with speeches," he said, loud enough for the back pew to hear. "But I can promise this. Marigold, I'll listen when you tell me I'm being a mule. I won't make decisions that touch you and these boys without asking you first. I'll do my damnedest to be the kind of man you'd choose again." Her eyes stung. She drew a breath. "I've worked hard to stand on my own," she said. "I'm proud of that. I don't give it up today, but I choose freely to stand beside you. I'll speak the truth even when you don't want to hear it. I'll keep teaching every child who walks into whatever room we call school. And I want to let you hide in your ledgers when there is a table that needs you." Warm laughter rippled through the church. May sobbed louder. 2 simple bands were exchanged cool metal, warm fingers. "By the power vested in me," Pastor Briggs said, eyes bright, "I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Westin hesitated, searching her face for permission. Marigold's heart pounded. She gave a tiny nod. His lips brushed hers. It was brief, careful, more promise than possession, but the world still tilted just enough that she had to steady herself. The church erupted. Gabriel whooped. Elias tried and failed not to grin. They turned to face the town together. For once, she didn't feel alone in that gaze. Moving into the ranch house should have felt like stepping into another woman's life. In some ways, it did. Claire lingered in small things. An embroidered pillowcase, a chipped blue flower mug. Gabriel refused to drink from any other, a dress tucked in the back of a wardrobe. Outside the master bedroom, Marigold hesitated. "If you'd rather choose another room, we can," May murmured. "There's one at the end of the hall." "Give you both time," Marigold's hand rested on the knob. "I don't want to erase her," she said. "You won't," May replied. "This house can hold more than one story." Inside, the room was plain but warm. A big bed, a dresser, a window that looked out toward the fenced grave on the hill. Westin stood by that window, hat in his hands. "You don't have to sleep here," he said. "We can take this slow." Slow sounded like the first sensible word anyone had spoken in days. "I think it would annoy her if we left a good room empty," Marigold said. His mouth quirked. She always did hate waste. They didn't share more than the bed space that first night. He lay on his back, careful not to crowd her. She lay stiff at the edge, listening to every creak of the old house, to Gabriel's soft snores down the hall, to Weston's breathing even out. When sleep came, it was deep and startling. She woke before dawn, the unfamiliar weight of the ring warm on her finger, the ceiling above her solid and unchanged. She was still there. For the first time in years, she did not wake with a list of places she might have to flee to next. Life didn't suddenly turn into a fairy tale because of one kiss and 2 rings. Fences still broke. Ledgers still needed balancing. Children still squabbled and skinned knees and butchered spelling words. But the edges of everything changed. Mornings began with Elias complaining about chores, Gabriel negotiating how much practice his leg really needed, May and Marigold trading comments over coffee about how much a growing boy could eat. Weston started coming in from the pastures a little earlier, drifting through the kitchen about the time breakfast ended, leaning in the doorway to listen while Marigold corrected Elias's grammar and praised Gabriel's careful sums. The school settled into its makeshift pattern. Older children used the church hall. Younger ones overflowed Mrs. O'Reilly's parlor. On good days, Marigold marched them out to the shade of a cottonwood that stood just inside the Crowell boundary fence. One afternoon, Weston rode by intending to check a water trough and instead reined into the sound of recited multiplication tables. Children sat in the grass, slates on their knees. Marigold stood before them, skirts hitched, hair slipping out of its knot, cheeks flushed with effort and sun. 3 times 7, she called. 21, came the chorus. 12 times 12? There was a pause, then Gabriel's proud voice. 144. Exactly, she said. Don't let anyone tell you different. Weston watched from his saddle, struck by how natural she looked there half in his pasture, wholly in her element. He nudged his horse forward. Checking attendance? She called as he approached. Checking my cows haven't been converted, he replied. She smiled. The sight tugged at something in him. She shooed the children off for a short break, gave Gabriel a stern look that said his running was still limited, and stepped to Weston's side. You make this look easy, he said under his breath. It isn't, she said. It's just worth the trouble. He nodded toward town. Lawyer wrote back. Papers I told you about will be on the next train. Deeds, wills, all the exciting things. Relief flickered across her face. Good, she said. I want to read every line. I'd be offended if you didn't, he said. They stood shoulder to shoulder, watching children chase each other through dust motes. Weston, she said quietly. Yeah? He answered. She hesitated. I don't know yet if I love you, she said. Not the way the girls in storybooks sigh about, but I. She searched for the right words. I like knowing I'm not the only one carrying the weight anymore. I like that when something happens, my first thought is, how do we handle it, instead of how do I? He looked at her, the corner of his mouth lifting. Same here, he said. I don't know what shape love will take for us, but I like hearing your voice in my kitchen. I like you standing up in council meetings and making them sweat. I like that when I picture 5 years from now, you re-sitting on the porch, yelling at Elias about his boots and teaching Gabe how to read the sky. Warmth spread through her chest, slow and sure. We make a good team, she said. He smiled. full and unguarded. "We do." Children tumbled back toward them, shouting about beetles and cloud shapes and how the cows chewed. Marigold clapped her hands and drew them in. Westin stepped back, letting her command the small army. Later that week, as she stood on the porch with a book in her hand, Gabriel called out without thinking, "Mama, look at this," and shoved a page toward her, eyes bright over a word he'd finally conquered. The title snagged her for a heartbeat. "Mama." Westin, leaning in the doorway, went very still. Marigold felt something in her chest loosen and knit itself back together all at once. She took the book, praised the word, ruffled Gabriel's hair. When she lifted her head, Westin was watching her with softness he no longer tried to hide. This wasn't the life she'd imagined on that rattling train, no glittering city, no quiet spinsterhood in a boarding house room. It was better. A house that echoed with boots and laughter. A school that might soon have proper walls again. A man who met her as an equal, even when they argued. Two boys who were slowly, shyly calling her mother. It wasn't perfect. It was real. She smiled and stepped toward them, dust rising around her boots, the sun warm on her face, the future unwinding ahead like an open road she no longer had to walk alone. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.